Hello, and a warm welcome from my study here in Vienna, wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted you're able to join us today for today's announcement of the shortlist of the 2021 Cundill History Prize. It's the world's leading prize for historical writing. My name is Michael Ignatieff, and I'm the chair of the jury. Let me introduce the other members of the jury to you. Eric Foner, DeWitt Clinton Professor Emeritus of History at Columbia University. Henrietta Harrison, Professor of Modern Chinese History at Oxford. Sunil Khilnani, Professor of History and Politics at Ashoka University in India. And Jennifer Morgan, Professor of History at New York University. Before we bring in the jury, let's hear from Mary Hunter. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Arts at McGill University. It's McGill that administers the prize.
Thank you, Michael, and a very warm welcome to everyone from me as well, from Montreal, Canada. Here at McGill, we are proud to administer this prestigious prize and advance its mission to celebrate the very best history writing of the moment. And we were excited to bring you today the first of many virtual events in our 2021 Cundill History Prize season. We have another fantastic jury this year, and Michael, I don't envy your task. We broke another record in submissions this year, and whittling down more than 360 books to a short list of 8, and then to 3 finalists, and ultimately to the one winner. It can't be easy.
You're right, Mary, it's never easy to choose, but it's important to get it right because winning the prize makes a big difference to the book and an even bigger difference to the author. Camilla Townsend, who is Professor of History at Rutgers, won the prize last year for Fifth Sun, her history of the Aztecs. Camilla, thanks for joining us. What did winning the Cundill History Prize mean for you?
Oh, winning the prize has meant everything to me. It has meant so much. I can't begin to tell you. At first, I couldn't believe that it was true. I think it took me weeks before I did believe it. But I believe it now, largely because there has been so much interest. Every week, requests pour into my email, some from organizations that want me to speak and tell them more about these native language sources that I based the book on, and many from individuals, some in Mexico, who want to know how they can learn indigenous languages and access some of these sources. That is exactly the effect that I would have wanted the book to have. And I think it has happened largely because of the Cundill Prize. So I am very grateful. Another thing that has happened is that I made the decision to try to get as much of the prize money as possible into the hands of Mexican indigenous authors. So I've made an arrangement with Ediciones Era, a Mexican publisher who published one of my earlier books, and they are working with me to publish indigenous works. The first one that is about to come out is actually an edition of a very fine and beautiful work of art, a large map of Mexico City that indigenous people painted in the 1500s. The press had actually done an earlier edition a long time ago in a hardcover, very fine, very expensive, and almost no one could buy it. So this will be a paperback edition that, quite cheap, so that many Mexican people can buy it and see the work of their indigenous ancestors there published. Okay? And the next project that Ediciones Era and I are working on is publishing a book by a modern living indigenous historian. So that will be very exciting when that happens. We'll publish it in Spanish, not in the indigenous language of Nahuatl, because we want there to be as many readers as possible. But I think it's very exciting, and we're looking forward to continuing this series if we can. And one other thing I'd like to say, since I'm here, is good luck to all the shortlisted authors. I remember what an exciting time it is, and I hope you're enjoying the experience.
Choosing a worthy successor to Camilla, last year's winner, has been challenging because we had a strong field. Over 360 books were entered. A triage committee at McGill narrowed the field down to about 50, and then the jury set to work beginning in June to select a long list. We were looking for books that are a powerful and exciting read, that challenge existing ideas and end up changing minds. That's a tall order. And after careful consideration, we came up with a long list of 14 titles.
Longlisted for the 2021 Cundill History Prize are The Loss of Hindustan, The Invention of India by Manan Ahmed Asif. Gladius, Living, Fighting and Dying in the Roman Army by Guy de la Bedouaire. Survivors, Children's Lives After the Holocaust by Rebecca Clifford. The Gun, the Ship and the Pen, Warfare, Constitutions and the Making of the Modern World by Linda Corley. The Horde, How the Mongols Changed the World by Marie Favereau. Underground Asia, Global Revolutionaries and the Assault on Empire by Tim Harper. Dear Palestine, A Social History of the 1948 War by Shay Haskani. Ravenna, Capital of Empire, Crucible of Europe by Judith Herron. Vanguard, How Black Women Broke Barriers, Won the Vote and Insisted on Equality for All by Martha Jones. Blood on the River, A Chronicle of Mutiny and Freedom on the Wild Coast by Mariolaine Kars. The Free World, Art and Thought in the Cold War by Louis Menand. An Infinite History, The Story of a Family in France Over 3 Centuries by Emma Rothschild. Waves Across the South, A New History of Revolution and Empire by Sujit Sivasundram. White Freedom, The Racial History of an Idea by Tyler Stovall.
So together with my fellow jury members, Eric, Henrietta, Sunil, and Jennifer, it's my pleasure to announce the shortlist for the 2021 Cundill History Prize. In random order, Survivors by Rebecca Clifford.
Rebecca Clifford's Survivors offers us a complicated argument about children who survived the Holocaust. She begins with an exploration of both the concept of survivor as well as the concept of childhood, and she draws on a significant archival reservoir, both of oral historical work as well as more formal archives, to give us a compelling and deeply moving exploration of childhood, of trauma, and of memory. Along the way, one of the many things that Clifford's book does is it speaks to the history of child psychology, to the ways in which the field of psychology and psychiatry understand children through the work that was done on survivors of the Holocaust. And she helps the reader to really think carefully about what trauma and memory mean. It's a beautifully written book, and it speaks broadly to questions about violence and its aftermath.
The Loss of Hindustan by Manan Ahmed Asif.
The Loss of Hindustan is a striking example of how the exacting study of neglected works from the past can undercut the supposedly more sophisticated understandings of the present. In this work of intellectual history, Manan Ahmed Asif recovers the significance of a 17th century Persian text about the history of Hindustan, as the Indian subcontinent was known in pre-colonial times. Through this recovery, Asif raises deep questions about the nationalist myths that anchor the post-colonial nations of Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India, myths that were confected from colonial refashionings of the region's past. Instead, Asif foregrounds Firishta, a historian from the Deccan of central India, whose monumental work, the Tariq-e-Firishta, was not, like the histories of empire, be it British or Mughal, meant to serve a political ideology or to celebrate a triumphant ruler or religion. Firishta's history, which drew on a long tradition of writings about Hindustan as a land hospitable to different faiths, described players driven by human quirks and contingent impulses. The British had little use for these aspects of Firishta's account. Instead, they produced histories of the subcontinent as a land divided by lethally opposed religions, whose duty it was the British to protect. Asif's account is at once a corrective to contemporary nationalisms and a meditation on the ethics of history writing.
An Infinite History by Emma Rothschild.
So this book is the history of one French family in a very ordinary country town and the people connected to them over 3 centuries. I think it'll be really interesting to anyone who does family history research and to historians, and hopefully they'll come together a bit more through reading it, because often these are two very separate worlds. So Emma Rothschild's story starts in 1764 with one quite ordinary woman who was trying to find out about her husband's property and slaves after he died in the Caribbean, and the 83 local people who signed her daughter's marriage contract to the son of a tailor a few months later. So she traces all these people and what happened to them through the French Revolution and through the 19th century, and she uses that to think about the way that ordinary people's lives interact with the great themes of history, things like the revolution, the economy, and ordinary French people's links with the French colonies. And she thinks about how little we can know about some people and how much about others, and the really infinite range of stories that we can tell about the past now and the new technologies that enable us to connect all those lives together.
White Freedom by Tyler Stovall.
Tyler Stovall's book, White Freedom, takes a subject as old as civilization itself, the meaning of freedom and the debate over who is entitled to enjoy freedom, and brings it right up to the present, emphasizing how the idea of freedom, usually somehow associated with a universal set of rights, actually has often been an exclusionary idea, connected to the idea of race, that some peoples are more entitled, more able to exercise freedom than others. How freedom in the age of the Enlightenment and then in the 19th and into the 20th centuries was influenced by the spread of slavery, of European colonialism, which enabled people to see freedom as something primarily for white persons. And he deals with the struggle over freedom in the 20th century, the struggle by those excluded for full access to freedom, and how that really expanded the nature of the idea for everybody. So it's original, it's far-reaching, it deals with many different parts of the world, and it certainly is thought-provoking in a country like the United States that prides itself on being an exemplar of freedom to the entire world.
Underground Asia by Tim Harper.
Tim Harper's Underground Asia reads at times like a political thriller and at other times like a picaresque novel. But it's a serious example of how global history can defamiliarize the past and decenter Europe as the lighthouse of ideas. In this case, the ideas of 20th century radicalism. Focusing on the first 3 decades of the 20th century and examining the choices and commitments of such men as Ho Chi Minh, Sun Yat-sen, Tan Malaka, and M.N. Roy, Harper also makes clear how limited it is to see anti-colonialism in Asia through the lens of local nationalisms. Rather, in the pre-nationalist era of anti-colonialism that he brings to life, Asian agitators and would-be revolutionaries plotted to bring down European empires while weaving and ducking their way through a conspiratorial worldwide web. From the port cities of Asia, they built relations with counterparts in Europe and the Americas, reading and writing radical tracts and planning assassinations across empires, activity all of which was closely surveyed and documented by colonial intelligence and secret services. After the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, those Western officials saw in these conspirators an imminent threat, and Harper documents how, in the decade after, colonial repression crushed this Asian background through deportations, imprisonment, and executions. Or rather tried to crush, I should say, because while most of the lives Harper describes ended in failure or death, the ideas they generated carried forth, helping create a new political consciousness across Asia, as they themselves became iconic martyrs of the resistance to European domination.
The Horde by Marie Favereau.
This is a really fascinating book about the Mongols who ruled Central Asia in the Middle Ages, and particularly about the Golden Horde, who were the ones who were most famous for ruling Moscow and the Russians. When I started it, I knew a bit about Mongol rule in China and Genghis Khan and the Yuan dynasty, but it's fascinating to see how the Mongols also engaged with all sorts of different cultures and just how sophisticated their engagement with them was. They were ruling in Ukraine and Bulgaria and Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, and as well as Russia. And Favreau has this amazing range of sources, not just Russian and Mongolian, but also in Arabic and Turkish and Persian. And we see these moving tent cities with their churches and mosques and shrines that can all be packed up and put on horseback. And she makes this really interesting argument that it's because they're nomadic that their empire is built on assimilation, which is why they're carrying around both churches and mosques. And their ability to use diplomacy across all sorts of cultures, including with Egypt, and the impact that they had on facilitating long-distance trade and how central that was to their rule, and then the impact that that had on Russia as well, which was really extremely exciting and very new.
Vanguard by Martha S. Jones.
Okay, Martha Jones's book Vanguard takes a familiar subject, the struggle for women's rights, the right to vote, but also other rights within society, and offers a very new perspective on it by focusing on the struggle of African American women, their contribution to this movement over a century and a half or more. She introduces us to little known figures, a few very well known, mostly have been neglected from the historical literature. And she ends up showing how Black women, as the title suggests, really were the vanguard of this struggle, not to denigrate the role of more familiar white women suffragists, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, but how the African-American women, Frances Harper, many others, really led the way in demanding rights for all, not just rights based on race or gender, but really in expanding the whole concept of constitutional and legal and social rights in the United States. So it's a subject that is relevant, original, and very important at this particular juncture in our society.
Blood on the River by Marjolaine Kars.
Marjolaine Kars' Blood on the River is a study of Berbice in the 17th and 18th century, but particularly of a slave rebellion that happens in the year 1763. By focusing on a small place in the Atlantic world, Kars offers us a really compelling and beautifully written study of the connections between a place like Berbice and broader currents of rebellion and revolution that are happening across the Black Atlantic. She gives us a really important addition to our understanding of what compels enslaved people in the Black Atlantic world to rebel, to fight against the terms of their enslavement. And she does so in a way that offers us an important corrective to our understanding of large plantation economies elsewhere in the Caribbean. This is required reading for historians of the Black Atlantic world.
Each of these books is not just an outstanding piece of historical scholarship, they're also a great read. Our jurors' work continues, and I hope you'll join us in mid-October when we announce the 3 books as our 2021 finalists. We're planning a special conversation, so that event will be one for you to look for. For what else is ahead, I'll hand you back to Mary Hunter. It's goodbye from me, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Michael, and congratulations to the 8 shortlisted books. The Cundill History Prize is being brought to you in partnership with a great network of media partners, including Literary Hub, CBC Ideas, History Hit, BBC History Extra, and the Literary Review of Canada. We are working closely with all of them to bring you the best content as the prize moves through its program. Follow us on social media and visit our website for the latest. Every event in our 2021 program is coming to you digitally, so you can join us from anywhere in the world. And every event is free to attend. I do hope you will tune in October to learn the jury's 3 finalists with us, and then in the first week of December for this year's Cundill History Prize Festival. Once again, we have 2 days filled with events featuring our finalists, last year's winner, Camilla Townsend, and much, much besides. You won't want to miss it. Thank you again for joining us in celebrating history and its vital force to steer us through the present moment. Until next time.